Welcome back to another episode of the Confident Kingdom Woman podcast. I'm Barbara.
And I'm Laura, and this is the podcast where faith meets personal development.
And we help you bridge the gap between who you are and who you know you're called to be.
So in today's episode, we are going to continue our conversation around self-care and how we take care of ourselves as confident kingdom women. And we're going to be talking about the S word.
Oh dear. What are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about stress.
Stress.
Yes. And so let's be real. Some of us are overwhelmed because we have too much going on. And then others are overwhelmed because we are carrying way too many things and things that we were never designed to pick up and take on.
That's good. And if I can add a third category, some of us are overwhelmed because we are trying to be God in our own lives. You know, stress is inevitable. There's always going to be a reason to be stressed. There's always going to be a reason to feel overwhelmed. There's always going to be something happening. And like we like to say, you know, when life is lifing, right? It's going to happen. But the thing is, how do I deal with that?
Yeah.
Like, how do I handle that as a confident kingdom woman?
Exactly. And so let's just talk about that for a second, because I think, like you mentioned, there's a couple of categories. There's a category of there's always going to be something going on. Then there's a category of you are picking up way too much. And so let's stick with just how do we help women who are actually dealing with life? It's, hey, things are coming, things are happening, and you kind of feel like you're, you know, getting washed over by the waves. How do we as kingdom women settle ourselves for when life happens?
According to scripture, we are to cast all of our cares on him because he cares for us.
Yeah.
You know, I'm reminded of the verse where Jesus is talking about worry, and I believe it's Matthew 6. And he says, your worrying is not going to help you grow, right? So us worrying is not going to solve the issue. And so I think we have to be very mindful when we get into that, you know, trying to control things that we have no control over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Doesn't help us grow.
Doesn't
we
help.
can't add to our height. We can't take on. And in that same chapter, it talks about how God knows we have need of all of these things. Like, he knows what's going to happen in life. He knows that things aren't always going to work out the way that we think that they are. There's going to be times where we maybe weren't prepared for something that happens. And so how do we cast our cares? How do we take that and say, okay, God, you know more than I do. I'm going to put you back in your rightful place. I'm going to sit myself down in my rightful place, and you're going to help me get through this. But what does that in practicality look like? Because I think a lot of us, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you may be a faith-filled woman. And so you understand what the scripture says, but what does that look like in real life? When life is lifing, when things just kind of feel chaotic, what does casting your care actually look like?
I think number one, telling him about it. You know, like just taking that action of going to God and saying, hey, God, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening, and this is how I feel about it. I think that's one step. But I think after that, though, we have to choose peace.
Yeah.
You know, we have to choose, because our worry is a choice.
Yeah.
You know, the Bible tells us that we should meditate on God's word. It tells us that we should think,
Yes.
I feel the help right here. We should think on things that are good and excellent and pure and praiseworthy. And so if I can't be worrying and thinking about those things at the same time.
So true.
And so I think practically it looks like, and we talked about this in a previous episode, taking those thoughts of worry and fear and doubt and unbelief and casting them down and replacing them with what God says, replacing them with thoughts that are good, excellent, praiseworthy, and of a good report.
That is so good. I was reading a book earlier this week, and in it was talking about kind of like the psychology and how our brains were wired. And so it mentioned in the book how, you know, when you set up your day, the first thing you should do is not get on Instagram. It's not look at the news. It's not fill your mind with all of these things that are going wrong, because one, sensationalism sells. So it's always going to be the hottest topic, the worst news, the worst case scenario. But it mentioned how our brains, when we think about survival instincts, are always looking out for what may be wrong. And if you don't, to your point, if you don't cast your cares and choose to focus on those good and positive things, the things that are worthy of being thought about, your brain is going to spiral. So it's like, how do you become intentional about doing that day by day, moment by moment, picking it up and saying, you know what, I'm choosing to think about this over that. And it can be hard, but it's just like with anything, repetition and practice. You have to like work that muscle.
You know, when you talked about waking up in the morning, you know, you made me think about something, and that is how we cannot live our life reacting to everything.
So good.
You know, we have to learn how to stay a step ahead of the enemy every single day. And I think one of the ways to do that is to start our day, you know, whatever that looks like for you, and it's not going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah.
But start your day, or at least at some point, take some time to get with God and allow him to just speak, you know, to you and just prepare you for whatever it is that you're going to be facing, you know, that particular day. And I think if we do that, then we won't go into freak out mode as soon as we get bad news, or we won't go into freak out mode as soon as something happens, because we've already gotten a step ahead of the enemy and prepared ourselves ahead of time. And so when something does come up, our first instinct is not to panic, but our first instinct is to go back and say, okay, Lord, you know, how are we going to handle this, or what are we going to do? Because we've taken the time to prepare ourselves spiritually, mentally, and emotionally before. You know, the scripture says, early will I seek you. And a lot of times when we think about early, we think about first thing in the morning, which it could be referring to that, but think about it more so as before something happens.
So
as
good.
opposed to, you know, something happens, now I'm in panic mode prayer, as opposed to just taking the time before, you know, and living and dwelling in that secret place so that when something does happen, we know how to handle it better.
I love that so much. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about those in the military and how they do not live, they do not do their drills, they do not prepare for war in a reactive way. Soldiers, warriors are preparing all the time because they know at any moment we could be called into battle. At any moment there could be a surprise attack, like anything could happen. But they are constantly doing those drills and practicing those skills to always stay ready. And to your point, if our day-to-day doesn't look like we are constantly preparing ourselves for whatever could happen, because life is going to happen, then what are we doing?
What are we doing? We're waiting on the enemy.
Yeah.
You know.
And he's going to come.
And he is going to come.
He's going to come. And what happens in war, and the same thing with our spiritual enemy, it's going to be when you least expect it. Mm-hmm. So how do you, knowing that an enemy is always trying to trip you up, how do you prepare yourself daily in and out? And I think part of this conversation, as we mentioned, life is going to happen. But on the flip side of that, there's also things that we take on that we should not be taking on.
Absolutely.
There's so much self-inflicted stress is what I will call it, where, hey, sis, you were not called to pick that up. You were not called to take that on. You were not called to worry about all of these other things. And so let's spend a couple of moments just kind of talking about that, because I think as women, as kingdom women, a lot of our stress is self-inflicted. It's not actual things that are happening outside of our control. It's, I'm taking on maybe this identity, I'm taking on this responsibility out of, you fill in the blank, right? And so let's kind of talking about what are some signs that you may be causing some of your own stress in your life. Yeah. I would say number one, and this is one that I am also guilty of, it's overcommitting. And I think it goes back to when we talk about identity and being sure of who you are. There are some things that maybe we shouldn't be committing to.
Right.
But it may be because we are people pleasing, or we're seeking external validation, or we're trying to win the good graces or be seen in a certain light. When you don't have a solid foundation of your identity, you can often overcommit.
Absolutely. And also, and this is something that, you know, I've been going through personally myself, is just recognizing and understanding that certain things that God had called you to in one season may not necessarily be what he's requiring of you in this season. And a lot of times I think we are afraid to let things go once that season has passed, because we have tied our identity, you know, and who we are to that thing or that responsibility or that title, that when it's time for it, for us to let it go, it can be difficult, because yes, God called you to that in a previous season.
Yeah.
But, you know, it may not necessarily be what he's called you to in this current season.
So we can just sit right there for a moment because I think that speaks volumes. And I feel like more people deal with that often than not, and they can't recognize it. They can't put the words that you just put to explain that, that is what's happening. So something is changing and you are now moving on. You are letting go. God is bringing you higher and you have tied everything to this one thing or this place or this situation. How do you take a moment to just say, okay, Lord, give me the grace to get through this, because change is hard, right? Like when we talk about stress and working through your stress and casting your cares, it's not an easy thing, because if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Right.
And we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So how do we help women who are listening that say, okay, I feel like I maybe am in a season of transition or God is calling me to something else, but I don't want to move?
It takes a lot of courage. I've been studying the book of Joshua lately, and you know, I was just studying about how, you know, when it was time for the Israelites to move to a different season. And I could go into a whole thing about how they had been used to following Moses, but now they have to follow Joshua. That in itself was a transition. But one of the things that God kept telling Joshua was, you have to be strong and courageous. You have to be strong and courageous. Because a lot of us, like you had mentioned earlier, we're afraid of people. We're afraid of what people are going to say, how people are going to respond. And so I think it's going to require a lot of courage and confidence in knowing that you have heard from God.
That's good. There's so much to be said in that right there. But you mentioned courage, and I think that's one thing that we often don't think about having on a daily basis. I think when we hear the word courage, we think of a situation is going to come up and I'm going to need the courage to like face this head on. But you need courage in daily life.
You need courage.
All the time.
Yeah.
Especially if you are going to do the things that God has called you to do. If you're going to walk in the path that he's called for you, you're not going to be able to see everything laid out, right? It's not going to be just this like easy, smooth path. You see the end of the rainbow and it's just blue skies all the way through. And so that's really good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about another sign that shows you are creating your own stress. And it's one that so many women, I think, this is not a real statistic, but it's going to be my statistic, that at least 90 to 95% of women are guilty of, and it's not resting. It is, I have overcommitted. I'm trying to be everything to everyone, and I have not taken time to rest. I have not taken time to slow down or to recharge. And again, it can be out of fear of all these different things, but let's just talk about the importance of rest, especially as kingdom women.
You know, one of the most profound revelations that I've gotten in my life came from Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15, where it talks about, in quietness and confidence, you'll find strength.
Ooh.
It was so powerful.
That is so good.
It is. And so I've learned how to quiet myself, you know, quiet myself in the presence of God and just allow him to impart that strength into me. And so I think one of the most powerful things we can do is just be quiet and be still in the presence of God. You know, I watched this lady pray. She was recording her personal prayer time. And the lady was like in full warfare mode, like the whole time. And I'm like, what? Like, you can't do that. Like, you can't. No, there needs to be time in your prayer life where you just sit and just rest in the presence of God. And even beyond that, I know, you know, we're not necessarily talking about prayer time, but we're talking about just rest in general.
Yeah.
I had a moment this week where the Lord, he showed me that I was feeling guilty about enjoying simple things.
Ooh, that's good.
You know, and it literally brought me to tears, because there was this thing in me that almost made me feel like, because I'm not where I feel like I should be in my life, that I don't deserve to rest. Or that I don't deserve to enjoy simple things. You know, have you ever heard the expression, you can rest when you're dead?
Yep. I am guilty of using that. Like, you can sleep when you're dead.
Yeah,
It's
you can.
fine.
Yeah, you can rest when you're dead. But no, no, it's okay to rest. It's okay to do things that just because you enjoy them.
Yeah.
And I've just had this mentality where, that's not helping me. That's not getting me anywhere. Just rest. Mm-hmm. Just do something just because you enjoy it sometimes.
I love that. I think more women need to hear that and then actually practice it. And you mentioned something before getting to like the simple things. You mentioned, how do you quiet yourself in the presence of God? And I know that's something that I in the past have struggled with. And actually, one of your Awaken the Warrior broadcast challenges that you did maybe a year, at least maybe a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, was where you gave us a prayer journal. And every day we were supposed to write down, what am I saying to God? Like, what's my prayer? And then give time for the Lord to speak to you and allow yourself to write down what he speaks to you. And that was probably the first time in my life that for an extended period of time, day in and day out, I think it was like 21 days, I did not pray and then get up and walk away. Like, I made myself sit there and hear from the Lord. And there were a few days where it was hard because it was just something that I wasn't used to, of giving him that space and attuning my ear to hear what he was saying. But it was so powerful. It was so powerful. And I don't think enough of us do that because, again, we are busy, we have responsibilities. And so even if it's just a few moments, it's like we're in and we're out. It's like, hey, good morning, God. Hope everything is great. Please help me today. All right, I'm on my way. And it's like, you didn't even give him a chance to respond. Mm-hmm. Like, cut your prayer in half by 2 minutes and let him just fill you up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was called Return to the Secret Place.
Yes, it was so good.
Yeah, one thing I want to say about this, though, y'all, is that when you first sit down with the Lord, thoughts are going to come. Mm-hmm. Your mind is not going to immediately just shut down and you're just going to be all of a sudden focused on God. No. Like, when you first sit down, you're going to spend time with God. You're going to hear God. You're going to listen to God. Everything that's on your mind is just going to start coming up. It's just going to start popping up, right? Yeah. And in those times, like, that's okay. That's not bad. That's not wrong. But the thing is, like you mentioned, we have to be there long enough to get beyond those things. Yeah. We have to be there long enough to where our soul literally has an opportunity to settle. Because all day long we're running, all day long, not only physically but mentally. We talked about the thoughts. Yeah. Our minds are constantly going, constantly. And so when you sit down, to hear God in the presence of God, that's not just going to automatically shut off. But the key is you have to be there long enough for it to shut off. Yeah. Okay? And so that means when those thoughts come up, it's okay, bring it to God at that point. And I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, if you commit the time, that's going to go away, your soul is going to settle, and you'll begin to hear God as clear as day.
That's so good. And it's so true.
It is.
It took me, I would say, at least maybe 4 to 5 days before I felt like I got into a rhythm of like, okay, my soul knew I'm coming to this place. All right, we don't have to sit here and, what do they call it? Like brain dump. I don't need to brain dump everything I'm going through, but I know that this is a time where I'm meeting with God and he is meeting me. And I can have that expectation that, you know what? It's going to be fine.
Yep.
It's going to be fine.
Yep, that's good. And that is true. Like, the more you do it, the easier it'll become to where it doesn't take you so long, to get into, to get focused in and get all those worries and cares and thoughts, done or over with, so you can just really settle your soul and hear from God.
I think that probably, and everything that we've said so far, is one of the biggest ways. If you're someone listening and you're like, I am dealing with stress and I don't know what to do, how to do it, try that right there.
Yes, and here's the thing, y'all. It's going to take intentionality. And we have talking about stress. Sometimes, we're going to get into this in our next episode about discipline. Yeah. But sometimes we can allow our lack of discipline to be a stressor to us. Yeah. And so instead of feeling condemnation because you can't spend all this time with the Lord during, on a daily basis, just pick a day when you can, because there's a day when you can. Yep. Now, you may have to be intentional about it. You may have to shut some other things off. You may have to say the N-word to some things. But just being intentional about, okay, okay, I may not have 2 hours or 3 hours every single day, but once a week I can find 2 hours, or I can find an hour of concentrated time to spend with the Lord.
The power of saying no to other things in order to spend time with the Lord, that will never be a bad investment.
Never, never.
Ever. You mentioned something just a few moments ago, and it made me think about something I saw on Instagram years ago that I never forgot. And it talked about how, as women, historically, mothers, wives, nurturers, caregivers, you never really see a lot of women in the Bible that are called up to the mountaintop to spend this, extended amount of time with the Lord, right? Mm-hmm. It's normally always the men. And in the content that I was looking at, they were like, yeah, because women, we've always had responsibilities when it comes to the house and the home and the children and the family and the community. And it's like, to your point, do not feel bad about having those responsibilities. God has graced you with the ability to do that. But you have to be intentional. When you do have time, make the time.
When you said that, you made me think about Mary and Martha.
Yep.
Like, you do what you got to do, but at some point, you're going to have to sit at the feet of Jesus.
At some point.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you're going to be running on empty.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So as we wrap up, let's just spend a few moments talking about the importance of rest and how God actually ordained for us to rest.
It's so funny because a lot of the things that we talk about here, they sound trendy, but they're not new. Yeah. Like this is like this is not new. These are not new ideas. Mm-hmm. God from the beginning intended for us to rest. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I know I can only speak for me personally, but I don't know. I just never understood the importance of it until it was really pointed out to me that, hey, this is something that God designed. Now, usually when 100 times out of 100, when we go against God's design, it's not gonna turn out well for us.
Never.
And so it was God's design for us to take a day out of the 7 that we have in a week and dedicate it to Him. Just rest.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought about, because I know I've thought about this plenty of times, and it's like, why did God take time to rest in the beginning, in Genesis? He created all the things, and then it said He took time to rest. And it's just like, when you think about God, you're just like, well, does God need to rest? And, you can joke and say like, no, not really. But there was so much intention and strategy, even in Him ordaining that for His creation, that He knows we cannot handle being Energizer bunnies. Is that right?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Okay. I was like, we cannot handle being Energizer bunnies for 24/7. There is a point in which your body will start to break down mentally, emotionally. You will not be at your best capacity. And so to your point, you can't go against that design. We can't feel guilty for maybe not following the world when they are going against that design. You see it all the time. We have this whole hustle culture. You have all of the boss babes, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not mad at the boss babes, but where is the intention of I've got to take time to rest? And you mentioned it earlier. Do the simple things. Read a book. Mm-hmm. Go to the beach. Go for a walk. Like, allow yourself time to restore. Allow yourself time to recharge with God, and then get back out there.
And again, that's going to take some intentionality. Mm-hmm. Because I know me personally, never. Like, if someone doesn't invite me to go somewhere, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. But no, in this season, I am going to be intentional about doing things that I enjoy.
Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful thing when God meets you in those moments, because I don't think it's always expected. I think sometimes we are resting because we know we need to rest. And it's like, yeah, but expect God to be there with you. Mm-hmm. He's with you in everything that you do, resting and working. And so invite Him into those moments, even if it's just, for 30 minutes or an hour, however much time you have. Be intentional about it. And it'll be beautiful to see how God shows up for you in those moments.
Absolutely.
All right. Any final thoughts?
No.
I'm like, stress is it's a tough word, I think, especially in today's day and age. And there's a lot of tips and things out there that help you with stress management. And, we could talk all day long about productivity and time hacks and building margin into your life. And we'll get to that in later episodes. But really, we just want to leave you with, be very intentional to rest. And then also be intentional about taking those stressors of life to God, because he is the only one who can carry it.
Absolutely. So hopefully that helped you. And if nothing else, just get in the presence of God.
Yeah.
If nothing else, just schedule some time just to be with him. And I guarantee you, he's gonna take care of all the things that you have been worried about. So
Exactly.
So that's it for this episode. And join us again next week. We got some more juicy stuff to talk about.
We do. And we're going to be talking about discipline.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my favorite topics. So join us next week. Thank you for joining us today. And we will see you next time.